Ngozi sat quietly at the long glass table, her hands resting on her lap as laughter and chatter filled the Okafor mansion. The dinner was grand, crystal chandeliers glowing, golden cutlery shining, and waiters moving swiftly with trays of wine and steaming dishes. Guests from all over Enugu were present, dressed in expensive clothes, their voices echoing with pride and gossip. Ngozi, in her simple but elegant gown, smiled softly, trying to blend in, even though she already felt out of place in a world that had never truly welcomed her. Her husband, Obinna, was in his element, moving from one guest to another, showing off his wealth and family name. When he finally sat beside her, she thought he would hold her hand, introduce her with pride, or at least acknowledge her presence. Instead, the moment that would cut her heart forever came like a thunderclap. One of the guests, curious and slightly mocking, asked who Ngozi really was. Obinna leaned back in his chair, smirked, and pointed at her casually as if she were invisible. "She's just a maid," he said coldly. The words stabbed through the air. The room went silent, glasses froze mid-air, forks stopped clinking, and every eye turned toward Ngozi. Her breath caught in her throat. She felt her chest tighten, her palms tremble under the table. Madame Adana, her mother-in-law, smiled with cruel satisfaction, while a few guests chuckled behind their hands. Ngozi's heart shattered, but she kept her head high, swallowing the tears that burned at the edge of her eyes. The words kept echoing in Ngozi's head. "She's just a maid." They weren't just words. They were knives that cut through her pride, her dignity, her soul. For a moment, she sat frozen, her eyes fixed on the polished table as if it could swallow her whole. The laughter that followed, soft and poisonous, felt louder than the clinking of glasses. Her heart pounded so hard that she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to vanish, but she forced herself to sit still. Across the table, Madame Adana smirked with delight, her eyes sparkling with cruelty. She leaned closer to one of the guests and whispered, not softly enough, "That's what she really is." A few heads nodded, others exchanged awkward glances, and some covered their mouths as they laughed quietly. It was the kind of laughter that cut deeper than insults. Ngozi's face burned, but she refused to let them see her break. Obinna leaned back in his chair, proud of his performance, as if humiliating his wife in front of everyone added to his charm. He sipped his wine without even glancing at her, the same woman who had once believed in him, supported him, and thought love would protect her. In that moment, she realized he did not see her as a partner, not even as a human being with feelings, just an object to use and dismiss. Ngozi's hands trembled under the table, and her throat tightened with unshed tears. She fought to steady her breathing. Inside she was screaming, but outside she wore a calm mask. She knew if she let her tears fall here, in front of these people, it would only give them another reason to mock her. Summoning all her strength, she picked up her napkin, dabbed her lips gently, and pushed back her chair. The sound of the chair sliding against the marble floor felt like thunder in the silent hall. Every eye followed her as she stood, her posture straight, her face expressionless. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice steady even though her heart was breaking. Without waiting for anyone's reply, she turned and walked away, her heels tapping against the floor like a drumbeat of defiance. The hall remained silent for a few moments after she left. Some guests looked uneasy, some whispered, and some pretended nothing had happened. Madame Adana raised her chin proudly, as if victory belonged to her. Obinna, unbothered, continued his meal, laughing with his friends as if nothing had shattered. But behind the closed door of her room, Ngozi finally let the tears fall. She buried her face in her hands, the pain too heavy to carry alone. The humiliation wasn't just about being called a maid, it was about being reduced, stripped of the respect she had worked so hard for, and mocked in front of strangers. Yet, even through the tears, a small fire began to burn inside her. Deep down she whispered to herself, "This is not the end of my story." Long before the glittering chandeliers of the Okafor mansion, Ngozi's life had been very different. She grew up in the quiet streets of Enugu, but she never knew the warmth of a family. Her parents died when she was still a little girl, leaving her alone with nothing but memories and unanswered prayers. Relatives took her in, not out of love but out of duty, and before she was even old enough to understand loss, she was given the broom instead of books. She became the girl who worked, the child who scrubbed floors, washed clothes, and cooked meals while other children carried school bags. There were nights when she sat outside on the steps, listening to the laughter of children returning from school, their uniforms neatly pressed, their voices full of stories about teachers and classmates. She would clutch an old torn notebook she had found in the trash and scribble letters and drawings with a broken pencil. She dreamed of classrooms she would never enter, of books she would never own, but her heart refused to stop hoping. Life as a maid was harsh. Some families treated her with kindness, but many others used her hands until they blistered and her back until it ached. Still, in the middle of that struggle, Ngozi discovered something she loved: sewing. Whenever she was given old clothes to wash or patch, she studied the stitches, the cuts, the way fabric folded and flowed. With scraps of material, she taught herself to sew tiny pieces together, making little handkerchiefs, baby dresses, and sometimes even redesigning her own worn clothes. As she grew older, she began taking small jobs repairing clothes for neighbors. They would pay her with coins, sometimes with food, sometimes with nothing at all. But she saved every single coin that came her way, hiding them carefully in a small wooden box under her bed. Each coin was not just money, it was a piece of her dream. Slowly, she built a reputation in her neighborhood. People began to say, "That orphan girl sews better than the tailors in the market." She saved enough to buy a second-hand sewing machine, and late at night when everyone else was asleep, she would sit by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, stitching quietly, her heart alive with determination. Ngozi knew she couldn't change her past, but she could shape her future. Even while she worked in the Okafor mansion after her marriage, she never stopped sewing. In the corners of her room, hidden from everyone, she created designs, cut fabrics, and sent pieces to customers who believed in her talent. What no one knew, not even Obinna, was that her small side work had grown into a registered fashion business. She had been entering competitions, networking quietly, and building something powerful. Behind the humble smile and simple gowns was a woman carrying a secret dream, a woman who had been waiting patiently for the right moment to show the world that she was far more than the name they tried to brand her with. Ngozi sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the silence around her. The noise from the grand dinner had faded, but the words still echoed in her head. "She's just a maid." Each time she heard them in her mind, it felt like someone was striking her heart again and again. She had left the table with her head held high, but now, in the quiet of her room, the mask of strength slipped. She pressed her hands against her face, trying to stop the tears, but they flowed anyway. Obinna's face haunted her, the pride in his eyes as he reduced her in front of everyone, the way his lips curled with arrogance, the way he didn't even flinch after breaking her. She thought of Madame Adana's smirk, the guests' cruel laughter, the whispers that would surely spread across town by morning. Shame wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, but deep beneath the shame, something else stirred. She got up and walked to the small desk by the window. The moonlight fell gently on her journal, the one place where she could pour her truth without judgment. She opened it, her hands still trembling, and picked up her pen. At first, she didn't know what to write. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced the words out. Line after line, she emptied her pain onto the paper. She wrote about being an orphan, about working as a maid, about every insult that had tried to break her spirit. But then her words began to change. The pain shifted into fire, the humiliation into fuel. Her pen moved faster, her tears drying as her anger turned into resolve. Finally, she wrote one line and underlined it twice. "Tomorrow, they will know who I really am." She stared at the words, her chest rising and falling with determination. This was not just a sentence, it was a promise to herself. She would not let Obinna's cruelty define her. She would not allow Madame Adana's laughter to be the end of her story. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, and carried too many dreams to remain silent. She closed the journal gently and placed it beside her bed. For the first time that night, she lay down not as a broken woman but as a woman preparing for war. Not a war of violence, but a war of dignity, of truth, of showing the world her worth. Her mind drifted to her hidden business, her designs, the competition she had entered. She thought of the results that could change everything, and hope flickered inside her like a candle refusing to die. As she closed her eyes, she whispered to herself, steady and sure, "They called me a maid tonight, but tomorrow they will call me something greater." Sleep finally came, not as an escape, but as a quiet strength gathering inside her for the day ahead. The morning sun rose gently over Enugu, but the peace of dawn did not last long. By the time the first shops opened and the streets filled with voices, a piece of news had already begun spreading like fire. It started with a headline in one of the most respected newspapers. Local designer Ngozi Okafor wins international fashion competition. Her photo was right there on the front page. Her radiant smile, her designs bold and striking, the caption calling her a rising star from Nigeria. Soon after, the radio stations picked it up. A smooth voice filled the airwaves. "We bring breaking news this morning. A young woman from Enugu, Mrs. Ngozi Okafor, has won first place in the international fashion and design competition. Her work has been praised as world-class, placing Nigeria on the global stage." Drivers paused at junctions to turn up the volume. Market women stood still in surprise, and young people rushed to their phones to confirm the news. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Social media platforms exploded with her name. Pictures of her designs flooded timelines. Hashtags like #RespectNgozi and #FromMaid2Queen started trending. People who had once walked past her without noticing were now saying proudly, "That's our sister. That's our own." The same neighbors who had pitted her for marrying into a wealthy but unkind family now spoke her name with pride and awe. In the markets, women gathered around radios, clapping their hands. "Did you hear? The girl they mocked last night is the one the world is now celebrating," one said. Young girls whispered her name with shining eyes, already dreaming of becoming like her. Even the elders, who rarely praised women outside of marriage or motherhood, nodded with respect, saying, "This one has brought honor to our town." Back at the Okafor mansion, whispers spread among the household staff. They looked at each other with wide eyes, recalling the humiliation of the night before. The same woman their master had called just a maid was now being called Nigeria's pride on every channel. One by one, they began to smile, proud that they had witnessed her strength all along. Ngozi herself had not stepped outside yet. She sat quietly in her room, listening to the radio, her heart beating with a mix of relief and fire. The world finally saw her, not through the eyes of those who mocked her, but through the work of her own hands. She thought of her journal, of the words she had written just hours ago. "Tomorrow they will know who I really am." Now tomorrow had arrived, and the world was calling her name louder than she had ever dreamed. Enugu buzzed with pride, but for Obinna and Madame Adana, the morning was only the beginning of their shock and shame. Obinna woke up late that morning, stretching lazily as sunlight poured through the curtains. He reached for his phone, expecting the usual business messages and jokes from his friends. Instead, the screen was flooded with dozens of missed calls and endless notifications. Confused, he sat up and opened one of the messages. It was from his closest friend, Uche, and the words nearly made him drop the phone. "Your wife is the designer of the year?" His brow furrowed. Another message arrived immediately, this time with a link to a newspaper article. Obinna clicked it, and his eyes widened. There, staring back at him, was Ngozi, his wife, standing proudly beside a trophy, her clothes displayed on models like artwork. The headline screamed, "Enugu's Ngozi Okafor wins international fashion and design competition." He scrolled in disbelief. Photo after photo showed her designs. Elegant gowns, bold African prints, modern cuts that spoke of brilliance. Comment sections overflowed with praise. "She's a genius, a true queen. Nigeria is proud today." His phone buzzed again. Another friend sent a screenshot of a trending hashtag, #RespectNgozi. Another message read, "Guy, now your wife be this. You're lucky and you didn't even know." Obinna's hands trembled, his chest tightened as he remembered the night before, how he had pointed at her in front of everyone and said, "She's just a maid." The shame hit him like a blow. The same woman he had insulted was now being celebrated all over the world. His face grew pale, his pride crumbling like sand beneath his feet. The calls kept coming, but he didn't answer. He threw the phone on the bed and paced the room, running his hands through his hair. How could she hide this from me? He muttered, his voice shaky. He remembered how Ngozi would stay up late, sewing quietly, claiming she was just passing time. He had never bothered to ask, never cared to look closer. Now he realized those quiet nights had been the foundation of her empire. The more he thought about it, the smaller he felt. His friends, the same ones who had laughed with him at dinner, would now see him as a fool. The guests who had heard him mock her were probably reading the news and laughing behind his back. Even his own mother, Madame Adana, would be questioned. How could they treat a global award-winning designer like dirt? Obinna sat on the edge of the bed, his face buried in his hands. His phone buzzed again, this time with a video of Ngozi's designs being displayed on an international stage. The applause was thunderous, the announcer's voice full of pride as he called her name. Obinna stared at the screen, speechless. For the first time in his life, he realized he was not the powerful one in his marriage. The world now saw his wife, not him, and the bitter truth sank in. He had tried to make her small, but she had risen so high that even he could not reach her anymore. Madame Adana sat in her living room the next morning, sipping her tea as she scrolled through her phone. At first, she thought it would be an ordinary day, but the loud voices from outside made her curious. Neighbors were gathered at the gate, their chatter filled with excitement. She frowned and turned up the volume on the television, only to see a breaking news headline. Enugu woman wins international fashion competition. Ngozi Okafor shines on global stage. Her cup nearly slipped from her hand. The screen showed Ngozi, her daughter-in-law, walking confidently across a stage, receiving her award. The designs flashed on screen, elegant, bold, powerful. The announcer praised her work, saying she had put Nigeria on the map. For a moment, Madame Adana simply stared, her mouth dry. This was the same woman she had mocked, the same one she had dismissed as just a maid. The sound of the neighbors' voices grew louder. Ngozi has made us proud, one shouted. Our Enugu daughter is a star, another replied. Madame Adana's ears burned as she realized the praise was not for her family name, not for her son, but for the very woman she had tried to belittle. Social media was worse. Her phone kept buzzing with updates. Instagram and Facebook were filled with Ngozi's photos, hashtags everywhere. Hashtag respect Ngozi, hashtag from maid to queen, hashtag pride of Nigeria. Influencers praised her strength, calling her a symbol of resilience. Madame Adana scrolled faster, her face growing hotter with every comment. And to think her own family mocked her, someone wrote. Another post read, "Didn't her husband call her a maid last night? Look at her now." The humiliation spread like wildfire. The very guests who had sat at the dinner table the night before were now whispering in shame. Some of them messaged each other privately, saying, "We were there when Obinna pointed at her. How foolish he looks now." Others shared the story online without mentioning the Okafor family at all, focusing only on Ngozi's triumph. By afternoon, Madame Adana could not step outside without feeling eyes on her. Neighbors who once bowed respectfully now gave her knowing looks. Some smiled politely, others shook their heads. She heard a group of women gossiping near the gate. Didn't they call her a maid? And now the whole world calls her a queen. Their laughter stung more than any insult. For years, Madame Adana had lived on respect and power, her words feared in the community. But today she felt stripped of that power. Every compliment from Ngozi was a slap to her pride. Every hashtag was a reminder of the cruelty she had shown. She put down her phone and sat back, her chest heavy with shame. The very woman she had tried to bury under insults was now the one lifting the family name higher than it had ever been. And for the first time, Madame Adana realized, respect cannot be forced or inherited, must be earned. And Ngozi had earned it, while she herself had lost it. The press hall in Enugu was full to the brim. Journalists, photographers, and curious onlookers crowded together, waiting for the woman whose name had taken over newspapers, radios, and social media overnight. The sound of camera shutters echoed even before she walked in. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the woman the world was calling a queen. Then the doors opened and Ngozi stepped inside. She was radiant, dressed in a gown she had designed herself, rich Ankara fabric shaped into a modern masterpiece, blending tradition with elegance. The bold colors lit up the room, but it was not just the dress that caught attention. It was the way she carried herself, her chin lifted, her steps steady, her smile calm yet powerful. This was not the same woman who had sat silently at the Okafor dinner table. This was a woman transformed. The cameras went wild. Flashes lit her face as microphones stretched forward. Reporters shouted her name, eager for answers. Ngozi raised her hand gently, and the room fell quiet. She adjusted the microphone, her voice steady, every word clear enough to touch hearts. "Many people know me as the woman who was called just a maid," she began. A murmur ran through the crowd, everyone remembering the story that had leaked from the mansion. Her eyes softened, but her voice grew stronger. "But being called a maid doesn't break me, it built me. Taught me resilience, humility, and strength. It showed me that no work is shameful, and no dream is too small to grow." The hall erupted in applause. Some people stood to clap, their eyes shining with pride. Cameras clicked faster, capturing every moment of her speech. Ngozi continued, her voice now carrying both fire and grace. "I was an orphan. I scrubbed floors when I should have been holding books. I patched old clothes when I should have been in classrooms. But those struggles were not my end. They became my beginning. Every coin I saved, every stitch I made, led me here today." She paused, letting the words sink in. The audience leaned closer, hanging on every syllable. "My story is not just about fashion," she said. "It is about never letting the world decide your value. If someone calls you small, prove to yourself that you are bigger. If someone laughs at your dream, let that laughter be the fuel that drives you forward. And if they ever call you just a maid, remember, you can turn that title into your crown." The hall shook with applause, louder than before. Journalists scribbled furiously, already knowing her words would make headlines. Phones recorded her speech, ready to go viral within minutes. Ngozi smiled as she stepped back, the flashes blinding but glorious. In that moment, she was no longer the woman mocked at dinner. She was the voice of strength for every girl who had ever been overlooked. Her transformation was complete, not only in the eyes of the world but in her own heart. The event hall glowed with bright lights, the air filled with applause and admiration as people celebrated Ngozi's victory. She stood at the center of it all, radiant and calm, speaking to reporters and shaking hands with dignitaries. Her name was on every tongue, her story inspiring every heart. Cameras followed her every move, capturing the grace of a woman who had turned pain into power. In the middle of that shining moment, Obinna pushed through the crowd. His once confident shoulders were now slumped, his face pale with shame. He had watched everything from the sidelines. The cheers, the praise, the respect his wife now commanded. The same woman he had humiliated was now being honored before the world, and he could no longer escape the weight of his guilt. He approached her slowly, trembling, his voice low and unsteady. "Ngozi," he whispered, his eyes wet with regret. "Please, forgive me." The crowd fell silent. Journalists lowered their microphones, sensing something powerful about to happen. All eyes turned to Ngozi, waiting for her response. She looked at Obinna, her expression calm, her eyes steady. For a brief moment, she remembered the night at the dinner table, the sting of his words, the laughter that followed, the way her heart had shattered. But she also remembered her journal, her promise, and the fire that had carried her to this very stage. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice strong enough to cut through the silence. "Respect is not begged, it's earned. You lost yours." The words landed like thunder. Gasps filled the room. Some people covered their mouths, others exchanged wide-eyed glances. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the exact moment a woman stood above her pain and declared her worth. Obinna's face crumbled. He lowered his gaze, his hands shaking. In that instant, the power he once thought he had was gone. The same man who had mocked his wife in front of friends and family now stood before her, broken and exposed. Ngozi, however, did not gloat. She did not raise her voice or show anger. Her calmness was more powerful than any outburst. She simply turned back to the reporters, continuing her interview as if Obinna were just another face in the crowd. The audience erupted into applause, not for Obinna's plea, but for Ngozi's strength. Her words began spreading instantly across social media. Clips of the moment went viral within minutes. The quote, "Respect is not begged, it's earned," flashing across timelines, already becoming a slogan of empowerment. Obinna stood frozen, swallowed by the very crowd that once admired him. Now, all admiration belonged to Ngozi. He had tried to silence her with humiliation, but instead she had found her voice, and the world had chosen to listen. For the first time, Obinna understood the true meaning of loss. He had not just lost his respect, he had lost the chance to ever stand beside her as an equal again. The runway lights in Lagos glowed bright, casting golden beams across the hall. Music filled the air as models stepped out one by one, each draped in Ngozi's stunning creations. The fabrics shimmered, the colors spoke boldly, and every stitch told the story of a woman who refused to be broken. The crowd cheered louder with each design, phones flashing as people captured the moment. Then, as the final model walked off, the spotlight turned to Ngozi herself. She stepped onto the runway in a gown of her own making, regal, elegant, and powerful. The entire hall rose to their feet, clapping, shouting, and chanting her name. Ngozi! 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 The sound shook the walls, a roar of admiration that filled her heart with pride. At the far back of the hall, Obinna and Madame Adana sat silently, their faces pale, their bodies stiff. They were almost invisible now, swallowed by the crowd that no longer looked at them. No one cared for their wealth, their name, or their pride. All eyes, all respect, all love belonged to the woman they once mocked. Ngozi raised her head high, her smile calm but powerful. She looked out at the sea of faces cheering for her and felt the truth settle deep in her heart. She had won. Not just the competition but her dignity, her respect, her place in the world. The cameras zoomed in as she took her final bow. And with that bow, her story closed with a line that would be remembered forever. Sometimes the world mistakes a queen for a maid, until she rises and makes them bow.